Welcome to the Uncanny Academy of X-Men, the premier X-Men related podcast in the Comics League, where we spread positivity through comics. I am your host, Professor Jared, and today we are talking about, all right, this was a fun little topic that I came up with because a lot of the most popular content here at Comics League is Zack Snyder related. So I decided to have a little fun with this. This topic is, what if Zack Snyder directed the X-Men movies? In other words, okay, let's say Zack Snyder went to Marvel. Which projects would they put him in charge of in relation to the X-Men? Because I feel like he might target the X-Men more because a little bit more of that God's level that he seems to do well with the DC heroes. So I made a list of certain projects I would like him to be in charge of. Note that I'm gonna have a couple of addendums. Number one, this is assuming that the X-Men are already in the MCU. We're not going to have him do the introduction thing. He's going to do the team movie. So that's the first one. The second one is that these are not necessarily the movies in the X-Men CU that I would put him in charge of. What I mean by this list is here are like my top 4 projects that I think he could do really well with that are X-Men related. So let's get into it. The first project that I think that Zack would do really well with is House of X, Powers of 10. Because first, it deals with that high concept, high level of intricate planning that Snyder is characteristic for if you've seen his actual plot for the Snyderverse. So I feel like it reads like a Snyder story. So I feel like it's most consistent with his artistic vision. Plus the fact it messes with continuity so much. And that's kind of what Zack Snyder does, and established is its own, arguably its own X-Men world. So that's even more on the line of Zack Snyder. Plus the fact I'd love to see his visual interpretation apply to certain images in the X-Men, in the book. Second off, a Wolverine Weapon X. This would be like the origin of Wolverine. You really want to do this because Zack is known for making hardcore badass movies like 300 and brutal movies, which is why Wolverine would be good. He would be the one guy, short of whoever directed Logan, I forgot who that was, to actually do a comic accurate and I guess rating appropriate Wolverine. Because here's the thing, there are certain superheroes, and this goes for Marvel and DC, that in order to fully do them justice, you have to make them an R-rated character. Venom is one of them. Carnage is another one. Wolverine is a major one. That's partly why the Punisher show is so good, because they up the level of brutality, because the character they are depicting fully encapsulates that level of brutality that I think is characteristic of Punisher comics. So with Wolverine, with the Weapon X storyline, or a Wolverine movie is what I mean, because Zack's also good at making that sort of samurai-like character who's alone. You could do it. You could sort of do it redo the plot for The Wolverine, which means that the one where he goes to Japan, except with Zack Snyder, because Zack is really good at making those lone warrior movies. They kind of did that with Man of Steel, kind of does that with in a way 300 and 302. So I feel like that would be a very interesting way for him to play with the character. Plus the fact, if Zack Snyder's Justice League is any indication, he's really good at making really brutal movies. So I really think that he would do really well there. Next is Avengers versus X-Men. Now I picked this one. Now I'm going to say a couple of things with this movie, and I'm just going to put the addendum. Everyone comes back at the end. What I mean is that Zack Snyder can just wipe the slate, kill all these major characters in the movie. The first 10 minutes, you got most of the major Avengers dead, most of the X-Men dead. It's a massive apocalyptic battle. So you could show that this conflict between the Avengers and X-Men, you could still keep the plot relatively the same from the book, but then you make it so a lot of these characters die, and then the apocalyptic conflict kind of screws Earth, and then you get that whole nightmare, a nightmare a Nightmare Earth-like scenario like we saw in BVS, Batman v Superman, and technically Justice League of the Snyderverse. My final movie is Age of Apocalypse, and this is kind of the thing where like Apocalypse takes over. It's like it establishes a new reality where the X-Men are like, I guess, never formed, and an Apocalypse takes over. And I think that this is the closest thing to the Snyderverse in terms of X-Men books, and I feel like he would do really well with this. In terms of who would be the Superman in this analogy, I would say Wolverine, because Wolverine's closer to the level that would be needed. Obviously, this is a departure from the actual movie, from technically movie, but from the comic book, in that Wolverine was, I believe, a good guy in that book. But the point is that he takes like this generally goodish character and flips him on his head and has him, because Wolverine was a horseman of the apocalypse. So there you go. It's already there. All you do is you just play with that a little bit, Snyderize it up, and then you have essentially the Marvel version of the nightmare sequence. You can even reference the Avengers, Thanos, and all that. In fact, you can make Avengers versus X-Men and Age of Apocalypse like the Infinity War and Endgame, and that Avengers versus X-Men weakens the world to the point where Apocalypse invades, kills the Avengers, so the X-Men have to step up, and then they are like, and then Apocalypse takes over Wolverine, and then it turns into sort of a mix of Logan, and by Logan I mean Old Man Logan, in that the X-Men were killed by Wolverine. So you get that element of it, and that could be the Lois Lane death, because for context, in the Snyderverse, what happens is Darkseid booms into the Batcave, kills Lois Lane, and this makes Superman susceptible to the anti-life equation, which basically is a mind control equation. So in this type of storyline, you can make it where Apocalypse and Wolverine temporarily takes over Wolverine, kills the X-Men, and then the grief of killing the X-Men makes Wolverine susceptible enough to Darkseid, to Apocalypse's influence, and then that results in him taking over and creating this alternate world. So those are the 4 projects that I think Snyder would do really well in terms of the X-Men. I try to go with like the closest approximation to what he's done in DC and like 300 and such. Just that way it's easier to make this prediction, because ultimately it's hard to like predict which types of movies someone like Snyder would do well in, because he does a lot of intricate stuff. That's why I put the very first movie would be a Hickman movie, because Hickman's known for like the intricate plot. And I would love a comic book, like any project that's like a collaboration between Snyder and Hickman. I think that'd be amazing. But it would be really cool to get these, particularly with Snyder's interpretation. And I'm hoping that maybe if the Snyderverse doesn't work out, Marvel hires him and says, do the X-verse, or no, I've said this before on the podcast, do the Squadron Supreme, but do your storyline, but with the Squadron Supreme instead of the Justice League. Really stick it to Warner Brothers. That'd be so great. I love that. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. It's a shorter one. It's just that's all I thought was necessary. But actually, real quick, I'm going to give you one more good movie that I think Zack Snyder could do well in, and that is Second Coming. Because once again, it's got the time travel elements, which we sort of played with in the Snyder Cut. And then it brings in like all these different storylines going on at the same time. Obviously, this would have to be a movie series, because ultimately, or like a sort of HBO Max, or like in this case, Disney Plus series, because there's so much going on in this book that you can't cram it into a movie without being 8 hours. I mean, maybe he could cut out certain parts and it could be another 4-hour X-Men movie, but still, I feel like it would be, would read better as a series. So anyway, Second Coming is the 5th one. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I will see you next week for our next UAX episode and class out of session. Bye-bye.